And this has like an enormous advantage, right? It's portable across any technology.
Today we're talking about web components.
And JavaScript on the front end.
And JavaScript on the front end.
Awesome, right? Web components are going to revolutionize the web.
Aren't they dead by now?
Help
me
no.
with that.
Yes and no. I mean, web components always had, like, they're around for a while. They have been around for a while, right? And the spec has been changing a bit. There was like a breaking change from version 0 to version 1. And now we are on version 1 since quite a while. And it was always the promise for like a standardized way of how to author front-end JavaScript and so on. But there were many parts missing from the spec, or that wasn't enough for people to build big applications and so on. So they never really took off, right? And there are nowadays there are actually a couple of frameworks that help you to author web components. And these are definitely not dead, but they're also not mainstream. So the most known one is Polymer. Well, no, it used to be Polymer. Sorry, it's now called Lit. Lit HTML, Lit Element, and so on. And then there's Stencil, another famous one. But yeah, it never really took off.
Kind of, right?
Right? Yeah.
Because like we wanted to use web components a couple of years ago already. And we did. We started using them in Flint to structure our JavaScript code better, like, or to have more like these kind of modules and connect them to the DOM and so on. And I always thought this was a great idea, and was kind of almost weird that there was no concept in JavaScript and you had to create all these structures basically yourself within JavaScript. Well, it's probably not that uncommon for programming language not to have like these strict things there, but like JavaScript always has been much more loose in handling scopes and types, and the issues that you would have or could have with JavaScript have always been, I feel, larger than with other programming languages. I remember back in the days, one of the most important books that I read was JavaScript: The Good Parts.
Yes, by Douglas Crockford, right?
Exactly. He also, I think he came up with the JSON type configuration, didn't he? And by now, it's probably irrelevant. Not entirely, but it's not that important anymore these days, which is a good thing. But back to web components. The reason I asked that, aren't they dead by now? Wasn't there this? Wasn't it that the standard wasn't pursued at some point, or there was no active development? You know better than me.
No, I think there's still like a lot of discussions around it, but it's not like, it doesn't have a lot of velocity, right?
Okay.
So I mean. Yeah. The funny thing about web component. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I just think probably then it was more my thinking, because we thought it was a decision about also using a framework for the future. Will we use React? Will we use Preact or Vue or whatever? And we decided to go, or what?
Or Solid.js.
Solid.js. And we decided, no, we want to go more with like the standard, the web standard, and the future of the web standard. And yeah, it's more like disappointing to see that it didn't look like many people picked up this new type of standard.
Yes and no, I guess. I think the problem was more or less that with web components, everyone kind of knew or saw that's like a great thing, but there's stuff missing. So I need to add like additional functionality, right? And that's where like the whole landscape scattered like totally, because everyone sort of invented their own framework. Actually, I thought about this as well when we first when we moved to web components. Actually, we have to say like web components, the spec consists of like 4 or maybe now 3 different subtypes kind of. And the one thing that we only use actually are custom elements. So we thought about this, or I thought about it when we switched to custom elements, that if we are going to just extend like natively, like or author components the native way by extending HTML element classes and so on and registering them, or if I provide a wrapper, like some utility functionality or some like base HTML class that we could extend that would offer a little more functionality. And I was really like almost there to do it, but then I decided, no, let's stick to the original way. However, we had to like include a lot of boilerplate then, right? And do that. And I think a lot of people felt the same, and then just developed a framework, a library for custom elements. And with that, like if you go to this website, it's webcomponents.dev. They have a blog, and there are all the ways to make a web component. And they currently feature like 61 different ways of authoring web components, right? So that is crazy. Like, which one are you going to pick? And that's why
ways to make a web component. Compare coding style, bundle size, performance of 61 different ways to make a web component. And above it says 64. Yeah. Wow. So what's the difference between all of these? Like, why is that so? Why are there so many different approaches? We are using only the custom elements, right? What are the other parts of the web component specification?
There's Shadow DOM.
Yeah.
Then there used to be HTML imports, but those were killed. Like this is what was got rid of.
Okay.
Honestly, I have no idea. I'm gonna look it up. Web component.
Here on Wikipedia, it says also HTML templates.
Yeah. Okay.
HTML fragments that are not rendered but stored until instantiated via JavaScript.
Yeah. So Shadow DOM, HTML templates, ES module specification, and custom elements.
Yeah.
So
why are custom elements cool? What do they do? What do we do with them?
Well, we use them to instantiate JavaScript. And that's basically it. We have we know that some code gets executed whenever some element is put into the DOM, right? Yeah. This is like where all of the jQuery stuff you did like on document ready and did like a query selector, and then you searched for like an element, and then you attached some, you usually like, called some function or instantiated a new object and passed the reference to the element as an argument, right? This is like how everything starts.
Exactly. We did that for so long. Yeah. Like I totally remember that. You always wrote your jQuery selectors, also looking if there was an element in the DOM, like class selector, if length is greater than 0, then instantiate that function and pass the context and so on. Yeah, right. But this also like has limitations because, well, first of all, you need to write this code to instantiate that, to do that. And also when elements would be added dynamically to the page or removed, like you don't have a handler there. So you don't have direct connection to the HTML element. And with custom elements, you do have that direct connection. So you define that custom element as being an HTML element or attached to an HTML element. And then once that's inserted to the DOM or the browser detects it, it will just like let you know and say, I'm here, now go do something, whatever you want. And then you have access to the HTML element already. You have the scope, the context. You also don't have that problem that you have, like that you might call functions on multiple elements at the same time, which have multiple instances, right? But you always have the direct connection to the existing instance. So this solved a lot of problems, but even not knowing about all that stuff, it's just cool to have this thing that just lets you know, I'm here, go do something now.
Like for us, it was basically a really performant native way of triggering some JavaScript execution. And like you can basically or have a custom element can be of like just the type HTML element, right? Which doesn't have like any specific functionality. But you can also like extend other elements, like built-in elements, and you have like a button, and maybe you want to add some functionality to that button, right? So and this for example is like one thing where you ran into issues because this is not supported by Safari, for example, and because it's like a little different how you would define or include such an element. You would do button and then an attribute is equals and then the name of the custom element, and this is not natively supported, and they don't plan. I don't know if something changed there, but for years they didn't plan to implement that, right? And this is like, this would be super cool. And there are ways, of course, with polyfills and with other things to make that extensible. But this is like really cool to just, because the HTML elements are there for a reason. And if you need to add like specific functionality to an HTML element, you want to start at the point of the browser and not necessarily invent something from scratch, right? So, yeah, but we never had the approach that we wanted to customize HTML elements in such a way, but like in Flint, we have components that are always bigger building blocks of like multiple elements. And that's how we just like basically group a couple of HTML elements as a component.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's also, very convenient, kind of not having to deal with multiple elements and like having to pass on different information and so on. Sure, yeah. Looking at the can I use stats, I think I'm noticing something that made me feel like custom elements were dead because they never really took off. I think that's more the thing. We used the polyfill for a very long time and really relied on the polyfill. And if I remember correctly, this was also because custom elements weren't widely supported. So looking at custom elements, the old spec, this was hardly supported anywhere, kind of.
Yeah,
right?
But yeah, but this didn't exist for such a long time, right? It was just the first. But the problem, as I said, it's that you still today, if you use built-in elements, if you want to extend built-in elements, you do need a polyfill.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like the and that's what Safari, like the one flag says.
Right, and that's still weird about this today because like when like custom elements, the first spec started, this was like even back in the days in 2014, and now we're like in 2023, and even there we don't have like with the version 1 great browser support in terms of like them doing everything the same and being able to use it without polyfills. And even here, like when was that implemented? Okay, Chrome 2018, Edge 2020. This is, for it having been around kind of since 2020, I feel this is a very, very slow progression there.
Yeah, but there's a reason for that as well. And there's also a reason why why we needed this polyfill for a long time.
Yeah.
Because for a long time we targeted ES5, right? So we targeted browsers that supported ES5 because we also supported Internet Explorer. And the problem is that custom elements version 1, they are class-based. So they will only work in browsers that support native ECMAScript classes. And then if you, however, target ES5 browsers, you need to compile it down, and classes will be compiled to prototypes or whatever, like to ES5 compatible stuff. And that's where the problem comes in, because you're using something and you're compiling it down into something where the native stuff cannot be supported.
Okay.
So that always felt a little weird, and this always led to weird things. But actually, there were, again, by Andrea Jarimacci, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, so by Web Reflection, some awesome polyfills that you could use to actually make that work seamlessly in like any kind of environment.
Yeah.
So yeah. And nowadays, I have to say, like, I mean, it's a conscious decision from Safari to saying, no, we are not going to implement that. I don't know what the reason behind that is, but it's just like that, right? So the V1 of custom elements is actually supported by 96%. Then you would have to say, right, of all browsers. And that is quite a lot. So you can definitely use them as long as you're not using built-in elements. But for that, you could, and this is what we actually did for a while, to like selectively to just load a polyfill for the built-in elements when you're on Safari.
Yeah.
And that works well. Yes.
Right. So yeah, at this point, it's safe to say it's safe to use web components.
Yes, definitely. But
it took a while, but now we're there.
And however, like, how do you author a web component? And I have to, like, if you look at examples from web components, and we've been always like, because a web component essentially will offer you a great way to write portable JavaScript, right? So stuff that you just take from one website and like copy it from there, put it onto another website, and it will still like, it will just work. And there are a couple of, some of the first examples of like widespread or widely used custom elements were done in GitHub, right? So I remember like there are, if you look at GitHub/GitHub, so and like all the GitHub repositories from GitHub, there is some elements, custom elements repo, whatever, where they actually have a couple of universal elements. For example, displaying a string like for the time ago, right? So these like relative datetime elements. And for this is like super cool because you can just say, okay, I'm going to put my timestamp into an HTML element that is called like time ago. And when it renders, it will just convert the timestamp to, like, depending on the browser, also to the time zone that you're in, into like this string. And this is what actually what I love or custom elements for, that they are supportable and they can be used like in any circumstance or whatever. And you just have to author and write some HTML to initialize that, right? So
yeah, because something like this makes a lot of sense to have that, like that, to have that time converted in the browser based on the user agent, language, time zone, and so on. Yeah.
And there's like the author, like Keithamus or Keith Circle, or I think is like his name. He's like been promoting that for quite some time, and it's like really, really awesome. And this is like a perfect use case for simple custom elements, right? But however, like when you want to add like more functionality, it's like, okay, am I going to write everything by hand? Because actually there's not so much that the web component or the custom element spec allows you to do. There's like the connected call. There's the constructor, which is called when the element is kind of created. Then there is the connected callback, which is executed when it's added to the DOM. There's the disconnected callback that is added, that's executed when the element is like removed from the DOM. Then there is the attributes changed callback, which just tells you that an attribute changed on the object. And for that, you also need like the static property or the static getter of observed attributes, which specifies which attributes to listen for changes, because otherwise it would be way too resource intense to watch for all of the attribute changes, right?
Okay.
But that's it.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah. Just there's a couple of things to know, but yeah, I guess that's hard to grasp from just like hearing it. Certainly gotta look into the spec and so on. Like to me, web components, looking at how we write web components in Flint, makes a lot of sense when I see it. It seems rather intuitive. Knowing what these callbacks are and that they are kind of native callbacks and not something that it has been implemented by some kind of framework. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to outline again about this relative time element, the really cool thing that about custom elements for those which might not like have this clear picture yet, it's that you don't have to write some kind of code or implementation for that, right? Typically, when you want to implement a feature like a slider or a pop-up or manipulate like the date time string, you will still have to write some kind of JavaScript code, some kind of integration. You can use a library and then have to write some integration. With a custom element, you don't have to do that. It's all there. You just have to use that HTML markup, that element, and then everything just works. That's the whole idea, that it feels like you are actually extending the functionality, the capabilities of the browser.
Yeah. And this has like an enormous advantage, right? It's portable across any technology. And this is also like one of the downsides from all of these web component frameworks, I think, because a lot of them are focused on like JavaScript environments. So either like JavaScript on the server or like other JavaScript environments, where I think the main benefit comes from the portability in the custom elements or in the web components. And I don't know, I always see like examples for custom elements when everything is like client-side rendered. So you have like these templates inside of a custom element, and then maybe even open a shadow root and add like all the stuff to the shadow DOM, add the styles in the shadow DOM. And then, I mean, that's also cool that you have like an encapsulated thing. So things become even more portable, right? Because you can have like widgets where styles from like external or from the website where you embed this on don't leak in, right? It's basically an iframe without the iframe, so to speak, right? And the use cases for that are cool, but those are not the use cases we are interested in, right? Because we have like PHP server-side rendered old school HTML, and we just want to use custom elements for like some enhancement.
Yeah.
And I think
like maybe at some point I hope that this basic idea and benefit of custom elements being portable would lead to us as developers having some kind of library or multiple libraries at some point where you can just go to and just download your custom elements or like the libraries and use them really easy on all kinds of projects. And I'm not aware of any of these kind of platforms, just probably because there are so many different types of strategies to use them and to implement them, and to use them in conjunction with other frameworks and approaches. And
but there's like webcomponents.org where you actually have something like that, right? It's it's basically a directory of publicly available web components with different technologies.
Okay.
Right. So
interesting. Yeah, I think I've heard about it, but I didn't really look into it since a long time.
But then a lot of the times they are like based on like lit or based on stencil or something like that.
But that's the point. My point, kind of like, it's not, I cannot just like use them because there's so many different variations. I could probably then filter for just those which are more portable, which don't require a certain framework or approach. But it seems not that straightforward out of the box.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something that Dave Rupert did, like Davidtron, like the co-host from Shop Talk. but I don't remember exactly what it was. But I think there was something like a dependency-free custom element directory, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
We gotta find that and put that in the show notes
yes.
if we do. Or if we don't, anyone listening, please comment below.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think this is where, that's why I said maybe we're also going to talk about front-end JavaScript, because this is where like we kind of cross the line, right? Between what are web components or custom elements, and what happens if you need more functionality than what is provided out of the box, right? And like the main idea on how to pass data to a custom element, sort of, right, is through its attributes, how you would do it in HTML. The issue with that is that you only have strings kind of in HTML attributes. So you cannot differentiate between different data types. So and also like it's all in the DOM. So the question is like, how feasible is it to put a configuration object like that you serialize to JSON first, then put it into an attribute, and then like read from it again. Like this, of course, this is what people that are only working in like JavaScript environments sometimes forget, right? Where you maybe do server-side rendering with JavaScript and you put like an entire object inside of an attribute, but in reality, this is executed on the server, and actually something totally different is written to the DOM afterwards, because you're only working either with the virtual DOM, or maybe you're compiling things differently, or something like that, right? And yeah, but then how do you add like more functionality? Like that's what what my point was.
So usually then you either gotta take it the way it is or leave it or customize it entirely, right? Because you don't have this easy connection kind of API to just like pass on some parameters in a nice way or to make adjustments to that.
And this is what I was talking about, what I thought about Flint, maybe how we would have like a custom element that deals with all of that for you, right?
Okay.
Because what we usually do, we add like a script a tag with like type JSON to the DOM as like the first child of like a component, and then we read like complicated configuration stuff from there.
Yeah.
So that would be.
Do custom elements actually have like do they expose like APIs? Can you expose kind of public APIs like functions, methods?
Now, everything that you define on a custom element is available via the DOM, because it's just the element, right?
Ah, okay.
And you also have to like be a little bit careful that you don't override stuff, like overwriting get attribute or like some other things will cause issues.
So then you can like still customize your to some degree, like or use that more like a library, like a tool. But I think also one of the probably good reasons that we are usually also writing custom elements, new custom elements for each component, is because every new type of component that we build for a website does have very custom specifications. I think these portable components work really nicely for this very specific use case that you want to use exactly that way, like the relative time element. But as soon as you want something different, a lot of customizations, you probably end up with writing it yourself anyways, maybe taking something as a draft, as a template, some other code, but then you want to fully control it.
Yeah, because any kind of abstraction that you put on to like just normal JavaScript will always be limited, right? And coming up with like a universal solution. I mean, we tried it in the beginning to have like really reusable components and at best not have to change a lot when we copy something from one project to the other. But we quickly realized that this actually doesn't really work in the custom field where we are working, because every component has different, or from project to project, there might be like totally different requirements for something. But what we ended up with is like boilerplates, right? We have something we call base components, or that we start with, that provide basic functionality, and that we can then customize just for this one project.
Exactly. Yeah. And that also helps you with not having to kind of reinvent the wheel and think every time again about how do I write the custom element functions again? What's the constructor and so on? But you just copy and paste code from an existing component, which has done that already. And like, again, it's not like it's our own framework or library. To some extent, it adds stuff on top, but we try to stay very close to the standards of the web.
Yeah, and I don't know, like maybe again about this authoring of web components or adding functionality. I think it's like this is a little bit the downside when you don't work in a full stack JavaScript environment, that you have to deal with different technologies, right? And that there is a clear border between server and client, right? If you look at all of these new frameworks and also like React server components and so on, it's basically in what seems to be like front-end code, you can write something like server, or like this is like a quick example, or solid.js example, where you can basically write server $, and then this is a function that takes any callback as an argument, and this actually will be executed on the server, right? So you can write a custom element, or like a component in these frameworks where it's like the lines are totally blurred, right? And it makes things totally easy because you don't have to go back to a PHP file, do this, and see where you get the data from. But like everything is like connected, sort of.
That reminds me of Meteor.js, I think.
Yeah, Meteor was... it still exists, right?
It exists. I just checked it. I just went to the website and I was like, does it still exist? Because this was at some point, I think it was this platform where it was like, okay, maybe this is the future and everything will work in the future just like this, or maybe it's not, and it just like at some point you will everything will, like, you will have to declutter everything again, and you lose overview of what's happening where.
Yeah, but I think like this is a little different what they are doing now than with Meteor, because with Meteor you just had like all of these client functions, right, that were executing stuff on the server. But now you have even the function definition can go inside of code that you would execute in on the client, and this is then just by the compiler taken out and executed in a different context in the server when you call this function. So it's like
okay, really, so the compiler notices that and then moves because that was what I was like, okay, then so you write your backend code in the front end, just make it public to everyone. That doesn't sound like a great idea.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't want to raise it because like someone must have thought about this. Okay, someone did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a new kind of approach that is also possible with like React server components or with like Quick City or Solid Start and so on, like some of the newer meta frameworks, probably also with Nuxt now with the new version. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So, but this is not web components, or not specifically.
No, not at all. Like, I mean, some of these libraries, like they work well together with web components. So you could like bundle like a solid.js, like solid.js code inside of a web component, but like it's not like these functions are like framework specific, right? So you need like a whole like server-side rendering framework for this to work. And I'm always a bit jealous of these things, right? In the PHP world, where again, like everything is like clear cut and it doesn't talk to each other, and there is not even, or it's really hard. Like in JavaScript, you have something, a library called TRPC. It's like a TypeScript library where like even if you still have the separation of files that are loaded in the front end and executed in the back end, even in these environments, you can have like you get like auto completion and like type safe or type errors and so on if you use something wrong, and if you make a change, like you can easily refactor things and so on. So this is like super cool and super fancy and whatnot, right? And again, in PHP, it's like, okay, we have our code here, and then we have our jQuery like code here. It still feels like this way, right?
Yeah.
And there are like, I mean, we've looked at many different things, and I mean, in the Laravel world, there are two big approaches or libraries that try to also get rid of this separation or make it easier for PHP developers or like more traditional developers to author these modern either like SPAs or like sprinkle some stuff on, right? SPA being single page applications. So you have like Inertia.js and Livewire, and Livewire is powered kind of by Alpine.js, and Alpine.js is actually this library where it feels, it's kind of like, or some people explain it like the tailwind for JavaScript, sort of, where you have like you can add functionality directly to the DOM, and it can be server-side rendered with like PHP and so on, and it will execute on the client like some JavaScript, right? That you specified there, and you can actually write real JavaScript in it, and so on. So this is a little bit of magic and quite interesting. There are reasons why we don't use that and why we're not gonna be using that, but in general, I really like also the idea of trying to like close the gap between server and client somehow, that you get a better developer experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this, for people who don't know all of these technologies, it's probably kind of hard to imagine everything, but yeah.
I think you lost me at some point, certainly. And then I got back on track, trying like understanding, okay. So it's like all about the connection of like connecting the backend more to the front end. But this is not possible with web components. This is like just like an idea that would be cool, and where like existing JavaScript frameworks and so on like have an advantage kind of. But yeah, for websites, most of the times it is still, or at least like PHP, JavaScript based websites, it is very separated. I think, yeah, that would be cool to bring that more closely together. But for me, web components are just like one of these crucial things that just like improved the handling so much more, because I consider it to be in a way that the server defines the element, and then if I have a custom element, then it fires in the front end and loads. It's a very basic version of this, but at least it is something that brings the backend and the front end a bit more close together.